we're going to move now from the desktop to the server. And actually, we're not going to move completely away from the desktop because it's hard to talk about Windows Server 2008 R2 without also talking about Windows 7 because there's so many better together features that you really need both to take full advantage of. In fact, it's actually interesting to note, this is only the second time in our history as a company that we have released a simultaneous desktop and server version of Windows. If you think about it. Anybody remember when the last time was? Windows 2000. So you have to go back almost 10 years to find the last time that we put out a version of both Windows desktop and server at the same time. And if you remember, how many people remember Windows 2000 and everything that was introduced at that time? That was a pretty major release, right? And there were some features that were introduced then, like group policy, all the IntelliMirror stuff, that was pretty revolutionary, but you needed both the desktop and server to take full advantage of. And so we have that same opportunity now with Windows Server 2008 R2. Does anybody mind if I just call it R2 in the interest of time? It's too much of a mouthful to say the whole product name. No. Let me give you a little bit of context before we dive in here. We've been doing these R releases now for a few years. So in between our major releases of the operating system, we do these refresh, these interim releases. And one of the main reasons we do this is frankly just to keep up with the pace of hardware advancements. Because every time we release a version of the operating system, the hardware manufacturers, they don't sit still. And so processors continue to increase in power, power management techniques, new architectures, all of these things continue to evolve. And if we waited 3-4 years to catch up with them, you wouldn't be getting the full return on your hardware investment. And we want to make sure that you get the full return on all your investments. In fact, the theme of the launch that we're doing right now for all of our new products is efficiency, the new efficiency. In fact, we have a new website that just launched a week ago today called thenewefficiency.com. And so really the umbrella for everything that we're going to be talking about today, everything that Stephen's talked about, that I've talked about, that Ian's talking about, is really around helping organizations get better return, get more efficiency out of their hardware investments, out of their software, obviously, even out of their liveware, their peopleware, helping administrators, for example, become more efficient through automation and scripting and things like that. So keep that in mind as we go through. A couple of things to know about the R2 release. This is the end of the road for 32-bit support. This is the first 64-bit only release of Windows Server. Everybody know this? I hope. Okay, so if you were considering upgrading to R2 and you have 32-bit hardware platform, you're going to need to upgrade your hardware to do it. From this point forward, we are 64-bit only. We traditionally, as we revise the operating system, we also increase our hardware support, and we can do that now up to 256 logical processors. On the virtualization side, we can take advantage of second-level address translation, so we can use hardware-assisted virtualization. We've got some improvements on the power management side through core parking and P-states that we'll talk about in just a short while. How many of you, by the way, I know I asked this earlier, let me just get a refresh. How many of you are using Windows Server 2008 R2? Okay, good, about 5 or 6 hands. How about the first release of 2008? A lot more hands. And then something earlier than 2008. All right. All right, so this will be an interesting, the focus of this presentation is really on things that are new or improved since the first release of Windows Server 2008. I'm pretty sure, though, that if you guys are familiar with 2003 or forward, you'll be able to hang with this. If you need a little bit of context, though, let me know. All right. You hear a lot about virtualization today. Stephen's talked about it. Patrick talked about it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. Microsoft has been doing virtualization in some form or another for over a decade now. This is nothing new. Started back what we call profile virtualization through document redirection, offline files. I think it's kind of a stretch sometimes to call that virtualization, but we'll go with it. Most of you are probably familiar with presentation and desktop virtualization, yes? Terminal services, virtual PC. I see lots of heads nodding. Okay, so you're familiar with those. Then we added server virtualization, the ability to run multiple instances of servers on the same hardware. And then Patrick just talked to us about application virtualization. What I'm going to focus a little bit on here is the changes and improvements we made to the server virtualization. Hyper-V 2.0 has several different enhancements over the first release of Windows Server 2008. Some of it's on the hardware side, the ability to take advantage of more processors, for example, for hardware-assisted virtualization, as I mentioned a minute ago. Things like VM chimney, or we also call TCP offload. It's the ability to take the network processing load and shift it out to the physical network card rather than have the CPU do it within the VM. Processor compatibility mode. Processor compatibility mode goes with our, it's not on there, it's the next slide, live migration. So I'm going to hang on, I'll talk about that one in a minute. And then the ability to do plug and play storage. You can add and remove virtual storage to your VMs along the way too. Okay. Live migration is probably the most significant addition to R2 on the virtualization front. I see a couple heads nodding. Has anyone actually tried this, worked with this at all? Okay, cool. And so have you actually done this in production? And what do you think about it? Yeah, great. It's great. It's up until now with R2, if you wanted to do a migration, you could do a quick migration, right? Quick is a relative term, but you could actually move a VM from one node to another, but you had to actually take it down completely offline first while you brought it up on another node. Live migration is the ability to actually migrate a running VM with users connected and applications going and memory being written to from one node to another in a cluster. Sorry? Just like vMotion from VMware. Just like vMotion. I don't know VMware, but very much likely. If you say so, sure. So what you're saying is we could have done this a long time ago with VMware, right? No, that's not what I'm saying. So, I only invested future in version 1. So let me show you quickly how that works on this. First of all, in order to do that, you need to have cluster shared volumes configured. So you've got one volume that can be accessed by both nodes in your cluster. And the reason you need that is that you've got that virtual machine file stored in one place. Just like with quick migrations, you'll copy the configuration data over from one node to the other. And then the tricky part comes in, right? Because the tricky part in doing a migration isn't from the virtual machine file or from the configuration data. What is it? It's memory, right? You've got a machine that's in active use. So what we'll do is we'll copy over the initial contents of the memory. Right? Now, that also presents another problem, right? Why? Because in the time it takes you to copy the memory contents over, what's happened? It can be accessed, and it changes. So what we do is once we copy the initial contents of the memory over, we do what's called a memory sync. And every change that's written to one node is written to the other. And so we get them in tight synchronization. And once you get to this point, you're at the point of no return. This is where you can't back out of the migration. And so